So I'm here with John Wickenden, who is Housemark's research manager. So he has 25 years of experience in social housing, everything from landlords, housing associations, ALMOs, memberships and trade members for social housing. And he spends most of his days looking at all of our data and analysing what's going on. So a couple of questions, John. Last week, we obviously had the budget, which didn't do a great deal for social housing, apart from many could say the child benefit cap made a difference. The markets were slightly affected, but the day-to-day of social housing is still ongoing. Any views on that?
Well, I wouldn't expect a budget to go into that level of detail that we need in the social housing sector. Kick the can down the road a bit in terms of the three £3 that the sector's asking for in terms of rent convergence in England. See, for Scotland, Wales, it's a devolved activity, so we wouldn't expect that to say anything anyway. I think there's probably too much emphasis put on one day of the budget when we're looking at things going through the year and changes coming on, and you can actually see the government is making changes, but it's just not sort of set into the budget period.
No, that's fair enough. So what we'll do now is we'll have a bit of a chat about what we do on a day-to-day basis and look at some of the data we have from our monthly pulse. So monthly pulse, as some of our members will know, is where we monthly capture KPIs and look at the data and what's going on in the sector. So there's some interesting things going on with complaints at the moment. The fact that we're getting more into the sector, but they seem to be handling the data that's coming in pretty well. Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, complaints is probably more about what the landlords are doing rather than the actual complaints that are coming in, the service issues. So the key reason for the rise in complaints is that landlords, certainly in England, are being pushed down the line of recording more complaints because of changes to the Ombudsman's complaint handling code, and now that is a requirement, a mandatory requirement. It means that landlords are thinking, hang on, I need to start recording more. And instead of palming off complainants by saying, okay, well, it's just an informal complaint, we won't actually record it, they're now being encouraged to actually put it through the systems, go through stage one, stage two. And then we've got that visibility now that we can see through formal complaints that are being measured as part of regulatory measures. And then that kind of goes on through right up to the ombudsman, who is seeing an increase in workloads, an increase in complaints that aren't resolved at stage two, going through there. But there are some interesting patterns that we noted as part of our work with the ombudsman in the annual complaints review. So it's well worth having a look at that. And just seeing like what is driving that. We did notice some really interesting things there when you look at inspection grading results. So landlords with higher grading results, grade one, for consumer standards, tended to have fewer complaints sort of progressing through the system and resulting in maladministration from the ombudsman. Whereas it didn't really have a relation to those stage one complaints. So the actual number of complaints coming in and being recorded didn't make a difference whether you were a good landlord or a not so good landlord.
You nicked my part there about what was going on with the regulator and the consumer grading. So I was going to sort of ask if there was anything further that you think, with all the changes that regulators bringing in, what they're doing with consumer gradings. What we've seen is a lot of the time the consumer gradings are now more concentrated on complaints coming in, the data that they handle, and things like that. But I guess that's just all part and parcel now.
Yeah, I mean, it's key to have your data in the right place, recording the right things, and making sure that you're adhering to the complaint handling code. I mean, I look at the complaint handling code, I look at consumer standards, and they all seem to be pushing landlords in a positive direction. Probably sort of back to the position they were in the noughties when we last had this level of regulation on the social housing sector. But it really seems like a sort of positive direction, and I think we're starting to see that in satisfaction as well.
On dissatisfaction, we obviously recently also looked at mid-year TSMs, and we've sort of seen a bit of a correlation for what's going on, some improvements as well. Do you think that's reflected in what's been happening with the consumer gradings as well as mid-year TSMs, end-of-year TSMs? Regulator released their end-of-year TSM data not too long ago as well.
Yeah, it's certainly having an impact. I think the whole thing about consumer standards is it gives landlords a framework about what they should be doing, where they should be going. It perhaps for the regulator, it doesn't go as far as the ombudsman is going in terms of like the good practice that it's pushing out on its website. But the regulators still set this sort of bar and say if you're not meeting that bar, we will inspect you, and you really ought to be thinking about it. So I've had conversations with landlords, and they're all thinking about how can we improve our service to the extent that it has a measurable impact on satisfaction, but also meets the requirements and exceeds the requirements of consumer standards.
The old satisfaction. We're back to it with the repairs as well, aren't we, at the moment, with the difference between the transactional and the perception, that big gap score we've got is about 12 percentage points. Have we got sort of the reasoning on why? I know there's a bit of a lag to it, but what's your thoughts in that one?
I think it's the difference between how did you feel about service on a particular occasion? How did you feel when an operative came into your home and fixed something that was broken? You feel happy. How do you feel about your landlord? How do you feel about the repairs service that it provides to everyone at all times? You might feel a bit different. It's quite a sort of natural differentiation between a specific occasion and then how do you feel in general. And it's always been evident as long as we've been recording perception satisfaction separately from transactional satisfaction, there has always been this gap between the two measures. They're both useful, but you have to look at them in the context and not try to think of like transactional satisfaction as being true satisfaction, whereas perception is more that sort of feeling in the background for the respondents to the survey, and it's a bit harder to sort of push in a particular direction than just getting something bang on right on a particular occasion.
A bit like their voids and lettings and that sort of service. Their voids, well, from my personal experience, I've been at various housing associations, and some of the void standards can be pretty appalling, which I don't think helps with what's going on when a perception as well when a tenant first moves into a property. Along with the housing crisis, I think we've got some data on what would happen if all of the landlords were performing at a higher level in regards to their letting standard, and how quickly they could let. Is it something like 12,500 houses would come back into circulation to help with that housing crisis?
Yeah, so if all landlords met the sort of higher quartile performance, the better performer, we would see fewer vacancies. There'd be more properties let, more properties occupied, more tenants paying rent, and it would be better for the sector. But it's a really tough nut to crack. This, it's like, well, do you reduce the lettable standards so that you can reduce letting times and get more tenants into the properties sooner? Or do you think, okay, well, we want these tenants to uh, have quiet enjoyment of their home, and so we're going to put things like carpets and curtains in, and make it sort of a nicer home when they move in, and so they have that positive perception of the landlord as soon as they move in. But then there's a whole load of other things, well, do you think about the carpets and curtains that the previous tenant left? Do you leave those in place? What I don't really understand is how something that works for the private rented sector doesn't seem to work for the social rented sector. In the a private rented property, you can expect to move in with a bin bag of clothes and everything is there, all the white goods, all the furniture, carpets, curtains, everything's ready for you. Whereas in the social housing sector, it's completely unfurnished. And we've heard from people talking at our club meetings about tenants going into debt just to sort of buy things when they move in, and that's not a good way to start your tenancy.
No, I completely agree, and that's something my experience, as you say, you go into social housing, it's usually people who are on lower incomes or haven't got that financial ability to go into private, and yet they're expected to pay what can be not just hundreds, thousands of pounds for carpets, or they live in bare floors and everything like that. So, would it help that landlords start to do things like that? Would it make a difference to the perception, the quality, and the standard that they leave the property in after? That would then also save money. And then we've got other things that seem to be holding up the voids and lettings process. You've got the all the surveys that have to be done, all the checks, the ICRs. Is there any sort of best practice, in your opinion, of how landlords might be able to improve it? Is it a case of getting in earlier, or
I think it's a mixture of everything. I don't think there's any silver bullet. We did some research with our Voids Club last year, and there was nothing that came out of that that I thought, wow, that's the answer. That's what you've got to be doing. It's a lot about relationships, which is kind of strange when you can think a void is an empty property. There is no tenant in there. It's about the relationships between the housing management staff, the repairs staff, the allocation staff, and the people that are looking to move in, the potential tenants. So if if there are positive relationships there, people kind of do things in better timing, and that all helps to sort of shrink down the amount of time that the property is empty. So it's about getting the handoffs right. It's about everybody understanding what they need to do and when. It's about having people available and being able to um, guess, estimate accurately what time is going to be needed to undertake these surveys or the um, safety checks and the works that actually take place when a property is void. There's no silver bullet. It's just about having it well managed and understood at that sort of higher strategic level to say, okay, our leadership team really needs to understand why voids need to be empty for a certain period and what makes them empty for too long a period. That was something else that came from our research, was that where there was a disconnect between what's going on the front line in terms of voids and what's going on in the boardroom or the senior management team, there seemed to be a difficulty and longer void times, poorer performance, higher vacancy rates, that kind of thing. So, as long as the senior management team is on board and understands, I think it's possible to um, improve void times. But it's a lot of like tightening up nuts and making sure that all the finishing details are there, rather than introducing a new system and just pushing it through.
so what you're saying is we'll just get all senior managers and CEOs out on void inspections and visits just to speed up the process somewhat?
Well, that's one way of looking at it. Yeah, back to the floor. I've seen that. That's that does have some effect. You know, and they really get to understand that. Whether they've got the time to do it is another thing.
No, very true. And what are we seeing at the moment on tenant safety? We've got a lot of things that have come in or that are changing. We've obviously got Decent Homes 2 that's coming up, still awaiting the sort of the full specs of what's going on there. Recently had Awaab's Law, and what effect that's going to be having on landlords, multiple parts of the business. And really, everyone is affected by that in social housing. It's not just a case it's the repairs team, it's not just a case it's surveyors, it's everyone. So, what do you think the stats are showing us at the moment and the data of what's going on with that?
Well, we're generally seeing an improvement in safety compliance figures. It's a really difficult one to sort of benchmark because we look at things like quartiles and there's not a very big range. You know, everyone's at nearly 100% or at 100%, and they can't go over 100%. So you got this big kind of squeeze of organisations around that figure. But when we look at the number of landlords that are at 100% as opposed to not 100%, a sort of binary view of yes or no, I've got full compliance at this point in time, we are seeing a general improvement. We know that electrical safety is coming round the corner. It's been in the private rented sector for some years now. So we know what the measure is. We know it's all about having these EICRs in every 5 years. And we've been tracking it for 2 to 3 years now, and we've generally seen that sort of improvement rising. But I think the thing about Awaab's Law is it's not just about the property, it's about the effect of hazards on tenants. So the need to have really good engagement with tenants and tenants understanding what they need to be doing, what they need to be reporting, what a hazard is just as important as actually looking after the fabric of the building.
That's fair enough. So, do you want to give us a little bit of a snippet about new KPIs that we're releasing for monthly pulse and what impact they might have with the changes that them?
Yeah, yeah. So from December, we will have some data. We're starting to collect data on 5 Awaab's Law KPIs. They're ones where we consulted our members and they felt that these particular five kind of captured the basics really. There are some landlords that are going, oh, we've got a dozen, we've got 20. We obviously can't measure 20, not on a monthly basis. It's just not feasible, let's say. So we are looking at the number of emergency hazards coming in, significant hazards, and those hazards, how quickly they're dealt with in terms of our landlords meeting the timescales for those. So if you have a look on our monthly pulse website, we will start to have data on that from Christmas time. A bit of a present for you.
That'll be the new year for me and Emma to look over what we're doing with those and help to release those out in the next monthly pulse. I think that's everything that I've got for you at the moment, John, unless there's anything else you want to add.
No, no, it's a privilege to be able to speak to you about it.
Thanks. And now I'm with Scott Bache, who's the lead product manager for Housemark. He's got over a decade experience in digital data products. So thank you for being here today, Scott, and speaking to me.
No problem.
So first of all, just want to go over a couple of things in regards to what the regulator's done. So the regulator likes to give the shortcomings of data. So we've seen it in their consumer gradings. They like to sort of say what's not good enough in data, but there's no clarity around what should or shouldn't be as part of the data. So is there an opinion on whether it should be like with the Ombudsman and complaints? They give us a very clear definition of this, what a complaint is. When it comes to data and the clarity around it, should that be coming from a body like the regulator for social housing, or should it be coming directly from landlords?
Yes, a great question. One that I've got many opinions to wax lyrical on. So, data standardization is a really sticky topic in the sector. And it's been boiling on for however many years. It's incredibly sort of you get emotive reactions on both sides of the fence. I mean, personally, my current kind of frame of mind in it is kind of a who is going to be the one setting these standards, who's going to be the one defining and deciding what they should be, and then who has to pay to implement them. And they're the kind of the two big sticking points for me. So direct government mandates could provide that kind of uniformity and clarity, laying out what everyone has to do, and kind of codifying standards in regulation gives everyone that sort of, this is it, this is what you have to do. The only issue then is because that then becomes part of that regulatory kind of package is, does that then make it a little bit inflexible? We all know what government's like. Yeah, jokes abundant. Does it make it a bit slower to adapt? Is it harder to get a bit of kind of inventiveness and kind of growing it and adapting it and flexibility to change? So that'd be the kind of maybe downside in my mind to the government doing it. Whereas the collaborative approach, I think everyone thinks sounds fantastic on paper, and there's loads of initiatives going around. And Hacked have recently launched their Hive, looking at expanding sector-wide collaboration, so not just on data, but on other key topics as well. Um, my kind of reticence with that kind of approach as well is that if you've got pockets of people doing standards in different areas, do you kind of get overlap? Do you get duplication? Do you get two different standards kind of being developed? Or, do you get big kind of personas pulling the conversation certain directions? You kind of get that boil the ocean type thing happening as well, where people try and define a sector-wide data standard for absolutely everything all at once. And, it's that one size fits none comes out of the back of it.
Mhm.
And there's two kind of use cases, I think, where actually data standardization has been done really well that may be analogous to social housing. So one of them is NHS. So I think anyone who can go on the internet and look at it, right? The NHS initially tried to do a data standard the kind of the social housing way, tried to do it for everything, but billions of pounds, threw it in the bin, complete waste of time. The second time they did it really small. And I think they bit off a single entity, which is like a customer data record, like a patient record, something like that. Something very small, very, very particular, nailed it down, embedded it, and then grew from there.
Mhm.
So by doing something small and just making sure it was absolutely locked down, it was perfect before you start scaling and expanding to more difficult areas. The other one that I think is actually really interesting was looking at finance with open banking. So the Competition Markets, is it CMA authority? the Competition and Markets Authority uh, mandated the open banking data standard. But also, so the way they did that is that they set up a third party body, the open banking, they're called open banking now, and made the biggest 9 banks in the UK fund it as well. So they kind of are like, we're mandating this happens, but we're setting up a separate body to do the doing that is independent from government, but also made the big players in the industry buy in and give them skin in the game. So that way you had that flexibility to be inventive, to grow it whilst not actually quite making it a government-led initiative. They just said it's got to happen. So it'd be really interesting to see if that kind of approach might work with data standards in social housing.
You're telling me you want housing associations and landlords to pay for a whole data structure? You might have a job on your hands there.
I don't think so. No, I think that who pays for it is a really it's the big sticking point, right? I think someone has to at some point. Um, Obviously, it's not going to get done, but the getting it adopted otherwise is going to without someone, I think, saying this has to happen from probably a governmental position. I don't think it's going to really ever fly. To be honest with you.
And no, I completely get that. And I think so from my background, when it comes to data and entering data, I was a housing officer in my last previous role, and unfortunately we weren't agile, so it wasn't a case that I was out on patch able to enter data there and there. So I'd go back to the office or I'd go back to home and I'd have my laptop and I'd open it up and we'd have that housing management system that said it would do it all, but it never really did. So you've got the housing management vendors, and there's a few out there, and we all know who they are. Do you think they're doing enough with the products that they offer for social housing? Do you think they are doing what they should do for the landlords? Do they have the systems in place? Do they know what should be in place for people to be able to use a single entry data point?
Yeah, I think adopting the debt. So this goes back to like the data standards piece, right? Is adopting that standardized data model. I don't think necessarily is in the vendor's best interests, personally. Yeah, especially if you look in maybe the short to mid term, maybe in the long term it is. It's going to potentially erode differentiation between providers. So if everyone's operating on a common data model, right, you can see where there's less room for differentiation between providers. But it also makes it easier for landlords to switch. So if everyone's operating on a common data standard, having worked for a HMS provider before, the biggest, nastiest part of any HMS implementation project was always, okay, how do we get the data from that system to this system? Okay, and it would be months and months. It was always the long pole in all of the implementation projects, the most costly. And quite frankly, a lot of HMS providers get paid to maintain old systems that have been technically decommissioned to keep a copy of the data in case someone finds an issue further down the line. Um, but from a landlord perspective as well, right? If you burden those vendors with the R&D cost of a standard, they're then going to be spending their money on that and potentially not other things that could be improved to help you deliver a better function. So there's a real difficult kind of a bit of a catch-22 situation going on there. I mean, I think the open data or the open banking kind of approach, where what they did is they actually defined an API standard. So rather than saying systems have to implement a certain data pattern in the back end, which of course re-architecture and that kind of horrible stuff, they said, right, okay, when you're talking between entities, this is that common language. This is what these fields are. This is what they mean. This is what they do. And so having that kind of interoperability layer and having then, kind of maybe if that gets mandated and then you kind of force the providers in the space to have to adopt that, I think that's that kind of point then when you start to unlock frictionless communication between systems and, not just HMS to HMS, but to other ancillary systems, your mobile working, your CRM type systems as well.
I think we've seen, and I think it's in your standardizing data report that we released last month, that 91% of landlords want a single data database. So that's, That's what we all want. We just want one place so we can log on, look at everything, whether it's from the rent arrears to when the kitchen's due to the ASB that's going on. So 91% of social landlords want that. As you mentioned, the financial industry and the banking industry seem to have that really well down. Why is it so different in the social housing? What do you say? I know it's you live in a certain area, your house is there, you can't just pick up and move your house just to go to a different provider. But what do you think the other difference is that we really struggle with?
I mean, I think that implementation or the integration is such a major challenge in social housing. I think it always has been. I think most providers, yeah, that single source of truth is aspirational still. But I think if you get the right things in place, so you get really strong governance over your data, if you have that kind of strategic direction and you have ownership over your different systems, it is possible and you can do it. But time and time again, it comes back to that integration piece, right? The same report we did, we also surveyed and looked at integration and who was using different. And I was completely surprised by the amount of people who are still doing things like using spreadsheets or having to directly hack into back ends of databases to extract sets of data out and then sort of clean and maintain them. And you kind of start building a house of cards to try and get to that single source of truth. Um, but yeah, essentially being able to bring that data in and out of different systems, have that sort of lineage between this kind of golden thread where we know which system's the master, which system's the slave, and have that sort of real-time communication updating between them is really vital for that. But I think it's possible for everyone, no matter, you don't have to have an enormous R&D budget to do it. I generally think it's possible. I think you have to take that kind of incremental baby steps approach to delivering it within your organization. So, picking a key entity, making sure that you know the data's clean, making sure you know what systems are updating it. Because, I think we've all heard time and time again, right, of the whole, I looked in this system and I've got the property is a 3-bedroom house and I went over there and it's a masonette, or it's got 2 boilers and this one says it's using a different heating method. So, being able to really highlight those issues, actually, I think, before you even start trying to fix them is massively important. And just spending that time picking one area, picking a really important, something that's going to give you a lot of bang for your buck, and gradually improving. Trying to switch to those kind of modern integration methods. So looking at using APIs or a middleware type layer to help you orchestrate where you've got issues. Because again, not to beat the HMS vendors over the head, but we know there are kind of some restrictive practices and maybe high costs around API access to be able to use their APIs as well. So, maybe a bit more leverage over HMS providers to help you achieve that. I mean, ultimately it's your data, right?
No, this is really true. You've already touched on it slightly. I mean, you're both nicking stuff out of my questions, by the way, just for the next time. But spreadsheets and those sort of workarounds, you already mentioned it. We've all been there, and everyone is still there. I think in the industry, someone's got a spreadsheet somewhere, whether it's in assets, whether it's in lettings. There's spreadsheets; they float all around the place, and it's that don't break the spreadsheet, don't do this, don't do that. There's other workarounds as well. Are we ever going to see the back end of those, or are they always going to be around in some form, do you think?
I mean, look, spreadsheets and workarounds and shadow IT and shadow systems, they're not unique to social housing, right? Every industry has them, right? Everyone's got, like you said, that person in finance with the one spreadsheet that runs the whole business. And if that person goes off sick, then no one is going to get paid, or the sky's going to fall, or stuff like that. I think the real issue is it's scaling, right? It's fine to have a spreadsheet and to do a process on it, and maybe, kind of build off of that. But as soon as it starts scaling and more and more people become reliant on this kind of workaround, that's when you've got a real problem. They become very complex, they're kind of taking over, and all of a sudden you get misalignment between other systems in your business, and then oh, but this says this, or Jimmy's spreadsheet says that we should do this, and becomes a real mess then. I think if we look at practical steps, and I think we covered a few of them in the report, is almost to have like a bit of an amnesty over your workarounds, right? Get people to kind of own up, going, I'm using a spreadsheet for this, or I've built this thing in whatever tool to try and help me with this problem. Because most of the time, none of them are done nefariously, right? They're all there because people are trying to do a job, they're trying to get something done, and the systems you have in place just quite frankly aren't working for them. So they've had to invent something to get around it and to actually do their day job that you're trying to pay them for. And so really kind of understanding what they're doing, why they're doing it, and working out what the upstream issues that made them go down that route are. I think that's really vital. And then start kind of being picky about replacing them where you need to. So if it's becoming a kind of a critical path, people using this system, or there's one person who owns this spreadsheet, and if they, God forbid, something happened to them, they would cause a big knock on in your operations. Find those ones and start moving that into a core platform or a core system, or making the changes to the whatever was happening upstream that stopped that person using the right system for that process. But ultimately, there are other pieces where people are going to use them all the time. If they're trying something out or they're just running a one-off report, that kind of stuff's perfect for that. So yeah, don't discourage people from using them where they should be used.
We're going to do a bit of a shout out to any Jimmies that are in social housing using a spreadsheet. Drop us a like or a follow, let us know what spreadsheet it is so we can have a chat about that next time. Um, Now, AI.
Yeah.
I personally love AI. There are a lot of people that don't like it, don't know what it's all about. But AI, it can be a massive help in regards to what it's doing with data. It can help sort of look at large scale data sets, look at reports. It can do a lot for us, but also it could possibly hinder us if it's not used correctly. I know there's a lot of social landlords. I think the sector started to pick up more recently in the last sort of year, 18 months or so, with AI. You've got Carbon Homes that have got a AI-enabled repairs intelligence bot. You've got West Scotland using Westy, which is a chatbot. There's a lot of people that are using it. But what's the do's and don'ts with AI? What's the positives? What do you think is good? How can it help, and how can it also hinder?
Cool. Yeah, lovely topic. I'm also a massive evangelist, and I think I'll do everything I can in AI if I possibly could to try and speed stuff up. I mean, that being said, I also understand a lot of the concerns that people have. Obviously, we're dealing with in our industry, we're dealing with people essentially, right? It's all well and good to talk about assets and properties and repairs, but ultimately, they're serving people who are potentially vulnerable in those properties. So, personal data safety, needs to be top of the agenda. So I always kind of try and temper my enthusiasm with some of those kind of safeguarding concerns, and you don't want to leak all your data out, or we've seen recently the emails about various leaks from Mixpanel and OpenAI as well. So even the big people can be subject to this. So I think making sure that you've definitely got a really good data policy in place. You've got your data governance policy, you've got your all your security stuff or locked down, and then start bringing AI into the picture afterwards. Definitely the right way to go. And then I'd also start actually looking at what its strengths are. Right. So at the end of the day, AI is a computer. What the computer is good at? Highly repetitive tasks that humans are very poor at. They could do enormous amounts of reviewing data, looking for patterns, looking for anomalies, consistencies, running checks, that kind of stuff. And I think we need to make sure we're pointing it at that kind of stuff, right? Highly repetitive, highly data-driven tasks. Automating things like replying, the chatbots that are brilliant. It's like the Westy chatbot, right? Answering questions about policies. It's a piece of text. You can just, here you go, here's the answer. And it also frees up your staff then to spend more time actually dealing with tenants who really need your help as well. Actually, the customer would probably prefer to go and get that. But I think it's in the data space that I'm really interested into kind of what's possible. It's the more advanced kind of use cases for that technology. Um, I think data is the key to all of this still. We still need to go back to our kind of topics earlier on. You need to clean up your data first. You need to get it trusted. You need to get high quality, because the old rubbish in, rubbish out still applies with AI. Um, but it's what it could do then. Once you've got that foundation, you can start building all sorts of really cool stuff on top of it. So one of the areas that, obviously people talk about a lot is looking at predictive analytics and forecasting models. Again, how we can start looking at, are we over repairing our properties or under repairing them, or, looking at investment trade-offs almost, should I spend more money on retrofit, or should I spend my money instead on building new stock, and actually look at disposals and how I can kind of forecast what might happen, and and look at patterns across the industry as a whole rather than just within my organization. I think that's where kind of Housemark can be one of those organizations to help you leverage that wider sector knowledge. But if you think about it, we are a very data rich and knowledge based industry, and that's right up an AI kind of street, as it were. It's how can we start, looking at leaning into those particular areas, how we can help train these kind of algorithms on that data, how we can look at those kind of key value points within our businesses that we need to go after first. I think we just spend so much time looking at, like, should we do a chatbot for a tenant or not? And naturally, let's go and play around with some exciting stuff that might move the needle. We see lots of news about AI implementations actually delivering very minor ROIs. And is it because we're focusing on the wrong kind of use case for them? We've all used kind of internet chatbots where you go, "Oh, I just want to pick it up and throw my phone through a wall. But actually, I want it sat in the background crunching the numbers and to go, actually, we think you should change your energy tariff, for example, because you're going to save 50 quid a month. Is that kind of what are those bits in social housing that we should be pointing at? And that's the areas that we should, hopefully drive some real improvements ultimately for the people that live in the homes.
Yeah, no, really interesting and definitely something, as you say, it's great, to 3 in the morning be able to report a repair just because 'cause you're awake and doing it. But as you say, if you can get AI to help you look at what's going on with your living situation, with a tenant and things like that, or it can improve service delivery on a grander scale for a whole, um, raft of properties for a landlord, it's definitely something that would be really useful and potentially investment, but long-term money saving in the future for people.
Yeah, for sure. And that was a great point you just made about looking kind of at the situation as a whole, right? I think we're all, and everyone gets guilty of this at times. Is you're doing a particular job, you're focusing, you got your blinkers on as well, and being able to say, for example, analyze your repairs data beyond just repairs without knowing some of the other domains. Maybe bringing in ASB and your rent account details and kind of complaints history and details about the people in the property as well, that you might not have the capacity or the capability to do, and have that kind of assistant be able to pull this together and actually maybe suggest alternative, there's something else going on here, or there's other ways that we might be able to help that tenant just by having something that understands your domain and can present these ideas to you, but making sure that that human's always making the final decision.
Always that human in the loop is a definite thing. But I mean, we'll just make an AI bot for everyone and we'll just make our millions and do it that way. Sell it to the big HM vendors and see what happens.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that's actually a really exciting area. So it's one of the bits that we're looking at Housemark is something called generative business intelligence. So it's essentially a bit like we've said here, right? Is there a typical kind of chatbot interface, but connected to your data, so that you in real kind of language can ask a question like, why is the void performance dipping in this particular region of my portfolio? It translates that to a query of your data, understands your data structure and the kind of the driving factors, executes a query, brings that data back, but then kind of helps interpret it as well. So you're not just looking at a wall of numbers, and to really be that kind of sparring partner, that properly, it's a hideous phrase, but that co-pilot for your decision making, to help you just democratize access to the data you've already got. So, it's not about more data, it's about getting your arms around it and understanding the insights that's there. And anything that could help you do that is worth a bit of an investment for sure.
Fair enough. And we're not being sponsored by Microsoft or Copilot, so all is good with that one.
Absolutely not.
No, that's great. That's really interesting. So thank you very much for that. Anything else you want to add, or should we just go and AI and make millions?
Sounds like a plan.
Yes. Okay, so that wraps it up for today. So I want to say a big thank you for John and Scott for being here and putting up with the babble and all the questions today. So really appreciate that, guys. Thank you very much. Thank you all for listening, watching, whatever platform you got this on. So thank you. This is our pilot, so hopefully it wasn't too awful for you. Um, and then just want to say, if you could take part in our monthly pulse, that would be great. The more people that take part, the more stats we've got, so the more insight and the more data that we can give you guys. Give our YouTube channel a like, subscribe to us as well. Give this video a like, just so we know that people are listening, people are out there. Visit Housemark at housemark.co.uk. Loads of really interesting stuff on our website. We've got some of our reports on there that you can have a look and download, all for free. Not all of them, but some of them, just to give you a bit of a taste for what we do. And also give us a follow on LinkedIn. We release a lot of information there, give you some updates on events and other things like that. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you next time.